Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Warcraft news. And this is a big one. I mean, what a time. Blizzard have actually listened to feedback. Now, sure, it was feedback that was first given in late 2019 based on the PTR, and yes, it is 2 months after the live version of 8.3 came out, but hey, we've gotten Blizzard to budge, and that is quite an achievement. Yes, account-wide essences are actually not in patch 8.3, nor are they going to be coming to patch 8.3. Instead, Blizzard are adding in a new currency sort of catch-up system, so it's kind of account-wide essences, but with a twist. Past that, they've also heard that people want more corrupted gear, so they've updated its acquisition to be, I'd say, quite a bit more regular, so that's also pretty good. We've also got a major interview from Steve Denuser, so yes, we've got a lot of stuff to talk about in today's video, and I really hope that the changes here suggest that Blizzard has listened and learnt. Two things first though. A, YouTube has really dicked us over on yesterday's video, so be sure to actually check it out. There's been a mysterious subplot through Battle for Azeroth that ties into stuff that has been going on since Legion. So if you watch that video, I think it'll really open your eyes to a few things. We see just some weird analytics going on, so be sure to check it out. And then also Patreon, love fantasy humans and mages. Well, this month you'll get all the human themed art, and you'll also get the mage class pin, the third in our year of class pins. It also helps us out massively, of course. I mean, it really does. Like, our last WoW News episode got demonetized, and, you know, we made that at a loss. So, seriously, the patrons are super helpful. We really do thank them for it. So, yeah, the patrons are an incredible backbone, and also the first 2 episodes of our TBC documentary are up there right now. So, big thank you to them, and with that, let's get into the news. With patch 8.3, many people wanted to play some new characters, but, well, they didn't exactly want to grind out Mechagon or Nazjatar for 20 days, and they probably didn't want to get their ult, you know, regularly killing Ashara in the old raid. And I mean, fair enough, because to most people, well, that stuff was 8.2 content, so doing it in 8.3 felt a bit silly. Blizzard tied class design to doing content in 8.2, and that kind of led to a problem where the class design was still relevant, but the content tied to it wasn't. This really wasn't that popular, and now after months of feedback, Blizzard have finally decided to implement a system, and this is based on the Echoes of Ny'alotha, which is a new currency. So these Echoes of Ny'alotha are a soulbound currency that alt characters can get from doing patch 8.3 content if there are unlocked rank 3 essences on your account that alt doesn't have. Now, eligible content to get those echoes includes visions, raid bosses, keystone dungeons, season 4 PvP, and the various 8.3 assault activities. So do all those things, you'll get your currency. Now, what does this mean? Well, first, it is not account-wide essences. It is accelerated acquisition for essences if you've already got them on a character on your account. So the idea of accelerated progression on your alts does remind me of, say, Mists of Pandaria, but also it somewhat reminds me of the Waking Essence system from the end of Legion at 7.3.5. Now, what's kind of funny is that, you know, when they released the Waking Essences, it was too darn late. The Legion Legendary acquisition was terrible in its randomness, and, you know, if they had have added those Waking Essences so you could just go and work in some Legendaries, if they put that in 7.2, I mean, I would have played a whole bunch more Legion. It's somewhat similar here, but it's not as bad. It is coming earlier. For many players, though, I would hazard a guess that the damage is done. I think many people have already killed N'Zoth and Heroic, they've got Curve, and they're now just not that interested. I mean, if this system had have been in for the launch of 8.3, it just would have been a more successful patch. I think that's something we all know. My hope here is that Blizzard know that it's too late, did it anyway because it was better to do it, and maybe understand that they should make changes like this quicker in the future. I mean, if I think back, it's an interesting situation because around the time of the 8.3 launch, we had the Ian Hazakosis interview with, I think, Millennium, where he outlined, well, he said that, well, I mean, I'll just do the quote, right? He said this, but account-wide essences are not on the table for Visions of N'Zoth. That's what he said, so there's clearly been a philosophy change. Now, technically, he hasn't backed off on that. They're literally not account-wide. Instead, yes, it's just the accelerated progress if another character already has that essence, but, you know, they've sort of went back a little bit on what they said there. Now, design-wise, I think that this is just about the right way to go for everything, the idea of accelerated progression and alts. Thinking back to Mists of Pandaria, it was a pretty popular design. If your main hit revered with a reputation, then your alts would receive double rep. when they were doing their daily quests. If your main capped Valor points, then your alts would get, I think it was a 50% bonus. And generally, I think that's a pretty okay way to do things. I mean, is it elegant? No, but it worked, and I'd like to see Shadowlands go back to that Mists of Pandaria style of progression when it comes to the account-wide stuff. As for right now, I mean, to be honest with you, I think I'd rather just have the essences literally be account-wide, just flick a switch, instead of having an accelerated progression system on the rank 3s that I maybe already have. I think it's very typical of Blizzard to try to solve this problem with a system instead of a simple solution, and I can see how they, yes, would want to squeeze more gameplay out of 8.3's content, but at this stage, I see those essences as a barrier, and I think they probably should have just removed that barrier instantly and made them account-wide. Then I also wonder if this being a currency system delayed it, like if there was more design work there. I mean, surely they could have just flipped a switch on it being account-wide like weeks ago, and that would have been possible. So I think that while this is a good step, I think it all shows a bit of that just lack of agility with the WoW team. It's kind of hard to understand why. Seeing the masses of feedback, they didn't make this decision earlier. That just remains a mystery to me. I mean, there's been talk of stubbornness. I guess it could be that. But I think through all of this, for me, the key learning from this endeavor is that Blizzard must listen to their testers, and they must act faster whenever problems arrive. All of the problems of corruption and of essences were talked about by people, myself included, who tested 8.3. If 8.3 launched with this system implemented, it would have been a more successful patch for Blizzard. Instead, Blizzard stuck to their guns for zero logical reason. They hurt themselves in their confusion, and I think that this is a good change, but it's one that's mostly missed the boat. I think they have to be faster in the future. I think they have to listen to their testers, and I think they have to understand that if they only sit back and analyze data after that data has been generated, then they're always going to be left playing catch-up. And that by the time they actually do try to play catch-up, it will have been too late, like with this. And I suppose that's really a way of me saying we need true design leadership. We need these calls to be made based on intuition and understanding of how people play in advance. I really do think that if they had have just been a bit more brave and a bit more just following their gut, then these decisions would have been made earlier, that this patch would have been better, and that it would have been a better outcome for the WoW team in terms of even just the KPIs that they're measured against. So, have lessons been learned here? Well, until we see more of Shadowlands, it is impossible to say, but I'm going to throw them a bone here, because we do know Blizzard have learned numerous lessons for Shadowlands. Shadowlands mitigates your bad RNG on the weekly chest by giving you options of whatever thing you want, and then a fallback currency if none of those options are good for you. Shadowlands caps anima gains per week, so that, well, at least in terms of its impact on player power, so the infinite AP grind is literally gone. So it is clear in a whole bunch of things for Shadowlands that they are listening and they are understanding. For alts, I mean, even Shadowlands, it lets you progress your endgame campaign stuff while you're leveling your alt. That's great. So I think they're doing a lot right there, and I do think that because of that, there is some reason to hope that Blizzard really have learned their lessons here. But overall, I just think the Shadowlands needs to be a bit of a safe expansion that's then just focused in content. I mean, if I look at a game like Final Fantasy XIV or even ESO, it's less that the expansions to those games rework the game every time, and they just add a whole bunch of content and stuff to do. I think that WoW really needs to just cut out some of the dumb anti-patterns that they've introduced to the game, and I mean that in terms of design patterns. So they need to cut those things out, they need to shore up the class gameplay, and they need to get back to what should be the focus. Content. Lots of content. Hopefully, the time wasted by years-long design flip-flopping will just be a thing of the past, and we can have a simple game that's good with a bunch of things to do and a bunch of things to achieve. I think that's fundamentally what most people want. Okay, next up, we've got another pretty great change that, once again, should have been here from the launch of this patch. Yes, it's a bit weird. They've made so many great changes to 8.3. I just wish they were there from the beginning. So, one of the things about corruption, I'd say the good part of it is the mixing and the matching, right? Working out a good build, maybe swapping around for different bosses. I think if there's a positive to be found in the corrupted gear system, then it's that. It's the playing around with your character. Now that's the whole reason that the negative effect system is there, to sort of balance that and to keep the player power in check. Now the thing is, I think that those potential positives were massively damaged by corrupted gear acquisition being highly random, and that meant that most people didn't actually get to experience the intended sort of, gameplay of the mixing and matching your gear for weeks on end until they actually had the corrupted gear. Well, to counter this problem, Blizzard are going to be making it so that horrific visions have a 100% chance to drop corrupted gear. So previously, they would always drop gear if you completed the right things, but it wouldn't always be corrupted. Soon, it will always be corrupted, and this will, I think, pretty rapidly expand people's just list of corruption options. Now, once again, this is something that should have been there from launch, and I think that it highlights an odd quirk to World of Warcraft's design these days. So much of WoW's gearing is modeled after the action RPG genre, things like Diablo and Path of Exile. Now, the thing is, right, in those games, you get loads of gear. It's just a torrent of gear all the time, and it's all sort of infinitely repeatable. Now, that makes sense, because it's the tweaking and the building of your character that's really the focus there. But with World of Warcraft, it's in a really funny place, where it wants to have that ARPG-like gearing and customization, but it also sort of needs to have slower-paced MMO progression that is balanced such that people can't just play the game all day and get massively far ahead. So the team's challenge, I think, is that those two things in many ways are at odds with each other. And then I think the sheer power of corruption just highlighted those issues. And that really is the design issue for the team. If they want an action RPG-like character building system, then I think they really do need to throw a lot more gear at you, because you can't wear all the gear at once, and what the gear gives you is options, and that's the intended gameplay. But then the thing is, they kind of know they can't really throw people gear that fast in an MMO, because it's got to last. So I think overall the best option here is to make gear, the system, a lot more simple, to slow down the drops, and then to have actual bits of gear be more interesting. I think that is the distinction. Gear as a system overall versus individual bits of gear being unique and having flair. You know, things like the logic loops, the punch card trinkets, the Crucible of Storms gear, that's great. But then I think corruption shows us the downsides of taking those good ideas and then systematizing them to actually be the core of what gear as a system is in the game. And I think that's really the core thing we're contending with here. So I hope that Shadowlands has boring gear. I hope that it's got slower progression. I hope there is less power creep from tier to tier. And I hope that the focus is not on the carrot or the stick, but the content. I think that Blizzard have released smaller amounts of highly replayable content in general lately, and I think they've really tried to work the carrot and stick to get us playing as hard as they can. They've really focused on the reward systems and that loop. But I can't help but wonder at this stage if there's diminishing returns there, and if it would be better to put that design time into just having more stuff in the game. More things to do, more stuff to achieve. I think that's what WoW really needs for Shadowlands. And then finally for today's video, we've got a big interview. So, Windows Central interviewed Steve Denuser, the lead narrative designer for World of Warcraft. Remember the lore guy from BlizzCon who talked to us about going cosmic? That's Steve Denuser. So, with this being an interview with a non-WoW outlet, right, it's Windows Central, there's a lot of stuff covered that you'll already know, so I'm going to do is focus a bit more on the interesting stuff, the sort of insights that matter to us as the more engaged WoW people. So, Steve said, and this is good, he said that looking back, he thinks they could have done a better job of making sure that both factions got a deeper context for where the story was going, so that the threads that connected all of the elements of the expansion were a bit clearer. Now, that was basically a quote from him, and I think he's absolutely right there. I think much of BFA's story did end up just going over people's heads, and that's especially with, say, Xalatath and how, like, the N'Zoth Ashara plan actually played into the faction war. I'd also say that, like, the main faction war across Azeroth, like, with that happening on our mission tables and us just sort of being special forces spy types in the war campaign, that people never really felt like they saw the overall war. So that's something I'd add to what Steve said, but, you know, overall I think he's right there. I think that it meant that each part of the expansion story didn't really get enough time to breathe, and I think that meant that many of the payoffs that Blizzard wanted kind of didn't really feel earned. Now, Steve also talked about the difference between Sylvanas and Garrosh, saying that they intentionally were echoing each other, but that the change is that Sylvanas' story led to true change with the Horde now having a different leadership structure, the type of one that would mean that a sort of dictator wouldn't really do well with them anymore. Now, he also said that the immediate aftermath of the war is in the game, but that they were very sure to show that Tyrande is not satisfied with the outcome, and he basically said that Teldrassil will be addressed, but only after lots of story has happened. And yeah, he also just said that in general, the repercussions of the Fourth War will be felt for a long, long time. So basically, my read into that is that you should expect some vengeance from Tyrande, or, I mean, maybe they'll try to subvert that a bit. I mean, Tyrande's a major character in Ardenweald, so I think we're going to see a lot of stuff happen there. But overall, I'd say this. It was good to see Steve actually talk about criticism and feedback. It was great. I mean, later on in the interview, he talked about how he really thinks they could have explained characters' motivations and, like, just their literal plot line better while still maintaining the mystery. So that's him admitting that, yeah, we went so mysterious, a lot of people just didn't understand. I think that's really good. And I think if they had done that better, it would have just tied the different storylines together better. And what was nice is that Steve seemed pretty clear in saying that Shadowlands has got a focused storyline that happens in an arc across the 4 linear zones of that expansion. And to me, that's really exciting. I just want a good story to be told. So I think that's the type of format that would do that better. I mean, look at, say, Warlords of Draenor. Yes, it really was hurt by, I mean, having cut content and stuff, but its leveling experience was really tight. And in terms of storyline, like, it was definitely more of a campaign across the zones that was a bit more tied into the expansion theme. So I just love to see what a more modern Blizzard could actually do. So that's a part of Shadowlands that I'm, like, genuinely pretty excited about. And I guess just hearing Steve actually acknowledge a bunch of the concerns that I had with the storytelling of this expansion was really good. And it does fill me with a bit more hope for the storyline of Shadowlands. And that is actually good. That's actually exciting to me here. And if I was to try to read into this, my sense here is that Steve was happy with the ideas and themes that they covered, but I think he understands they could have done a better job on executing on those ideas and actually telling that story to the players of the game. I think that if that's what he thinks, then I agree with him, and it's overall a sort of a good sign. I'd say that, like, the WoW lore was more interesting as told through lore videos and speculation that brought it all together than it was actually just in-game. And I think that's been really good for my channel. But it's also made it really tough, I think, for players who are not super into the lore to actually feel connected to the story and to the world. Now, on that, and to just sort of roll off the video, for N'Zoth's story, well, Steve said that the old gods have plans within plans. He reinforced that the light only sees one path, but the void sees many, and that to believe that there could only be a single outcome to the struggle against N'Zoth would actually be, well, to ignore the lessons that N'Zoth was trying to teach us. And I think that pretty much means, yeah, we're going to see him again. And to put my own speculation in here, I mean, hey, N'Zoth was trapped in a Titan prison. We freed him. Maybe he got some work done when we were fighting him, and perhaps in us killing him, right after he was totally free from the Titan prison, maybe that meant that we actually just sent his essence, well, right where he wanted it. I actually think that's probably what's happening, and I think we'll probably see N'Zoth again, but I think we're going to see him in a very, very different form indeed. Anyway, so there you go. That's today's video. A lot of topics. I would love to know. Please let me know down in the comments. What do you think about all the things we talked about today? And if you want to watch something next, well, 2 things. YouTube messed us over in terms of the deployment of yesterday's video, but I think it was a really good one. I think you'll really enjoy it. I think it'll really open your eyes to a few things of the lore, so be sure to check out yesterday's video. And if you want something more, the first 2 episodes of our Burning Crusade documentary, that is about 35 to 40 minutes of content, it's up on Patreon right now. And if you want a bit more, of course, on Patreon for our master tier, there's a bunch of physical loot, so you can check that out and it truly does help us. Thank you very much for watching this video. Let me know what you think, and with that, I'll see you next time.